On Wednesday, House Intelligence Committee Chair Representative Mike Turner announced what's being described as a serious national security threat to members of Congress. And since then, multiple sources have confirmed that this threat involves Russia's efforts to field an orbital nuclear weapon. And while officials from the White House to the halls of Congress have repeatedly said that this threat is not imminent, and in fact, this weapon isn't even in orbit, that hasn't stopped the internet from doing what the internet does and spreading fear to the best of its ability. So let's talk about this developing national security threat, what an orbital nuke could really do, and whether or not you need to lose any sleep over it. I'm Alex Hollings, and this is a special edition of Air Power. Before we dive in, let's take a minute to talk about today's sponsor, allveteran.com. Now, if you're a veteran like me, you've almost certainly already dealt with the VA, and you know that despite the good intentions of the folks who work there, the system itself can be exceedingly difficult to navigate. In fact, I was medically retired as a sergeant from the Marine Corps because of multiple knee surgeries, but today, my knees aren't covered by the VA, nor do I receive disability payments for them, and it's all because of a paperwork mishap. This sort of thing happens to veterans all the time, and it's where allveteran.com can really help. Allveteran.com has a simple and easy to use process to help you gather all of the medical evidence you need for a potentially successful claim to increase your disability payments with the VA. In fact, to date, more than 48,000 veterans have already been helped by allveteran.com's medical evidence development services, resulting in an average increased disability payment of around $1,205 per month. So if you, like me, are daunted by the VA disability claims process, go to info.allveteran.com/sandbox to help make sure you get the benefits that you earned in uniform. Click on the link in the description below to get started. On Wednesday, Representative Mike Turner took to Twitter, or X, or whatever you want to call it, to post a statement saying, and I quote, "Today, the House Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence has made available to all members of Congress information concerning a serious national security threat. I am requesting that President Biden declassify all information relating to this threat so that Congress, the administration, and our allies can openly discuss the actions necessary to respond to this threat." And as you might have guessed, with a statement like this going out without any further context, the internet promptly lost its mind. Now, according to multiple unconfirmed sources, the threat is in relation to Russia's efforts to develop a space-based nuclear weapon that, if detonated, could absolutely wipe out the world's satellite infrastructure and more. Now, this could have crippling effects on multiple industries and entire populations, but multiple officials have stated very plainly that this weapon is not already in orbit, nor does it represent an active capability that Russia has. Or as Connecticut Representative Jim Hines put it on Wednesday, it is a serious national security issue in the medium to long term that the Congress and the administration needs to focus on, but no need to buy gold. Now, I normally steer way clear of politics, but it's pretty difficult to ignore the fact that this announcement comes amid ongoing debate within Congress over a $95 billion military aid package meant to provide support to Ukraine, Israel, and Taiwan. Now, this bipartisan measure passed the Senate on Tuesday with a 70-29 vote, but it remains unclear if Congressional House Speaker Mike Johnson will even bring this bill up for a vote. For his part, Johnson also attempted to assuage concerns with a statement that he released on Wednesday. I'll quote it here. "I want to assure the American people that there is no need for public alarm. We are going to work together to address this matter as we do all sensitive matters that are classified and beyond that. I'm not at liberty to discuss classified information and really can't say much more, but we just want to assure everyone steady hands are at the wheel. We're working on it and there's no need for alarm." Now, in that same vein, White House officials have also stated that while this threat appears serious, there are ways to contain it. Of course, despite these reassurances, social media platforms like TikTok were almost immediately flooded with hyperbolic discussion, with people saying stuff like, "The more they tell us not to panic, the more I think we should panic." And to some extent, Turner had to know releasing this statement with no further information or context was sure to create an uproar, leading some to question whether this announcement was politically motivated, aiming to push Congress to act. Now, Turner himself recently returned from Ukraine, where he and a bipartisan delegation of lawmakers concluded that Ukraine was in dire need of support that has, thus far, been hamstrung by a group of Republican lawmakers that are closely aligned with former President Donald Trump. And in fact, President Biden made a statement to that effect earlier this week. I'll quote it now. "I call on the Speaker to let the full House speak its mind and not allow a minority of the most extreme voices in the House to block this bill from being voted on. Supporting this bill is standing up to Putin. Opposing it is playing into Putin's hands." While more details about this threat are sure to be released as information is declassified, it's not tough to assess how serious a space-based nuclear weapon could be. Now, multiple reports have pointed out that this space-based or orbital nuke is not meant to engage ground targets, but is instead meant to be an anti-satellite measure. Now, America has already been working tirelessly to find ways to harden its sprawling fleet of satellites, many of which were put into orbit before adversary nations possessed anti-satellite capabilities. Or, as former Air Force Secretary Heather Wilson once said of America's satellites, the US built an exquisite glass house before the invention of stones. Now, what she meant was that many of the satellites in orbit today were launched before there were orbital threats to even worry about. But today, both Russia and China are believed to already have space-based weapons in orbit known as Inspector satellites, which can maneuver around, collect data from, and interfere with the function of other orbital bodies. Destroying a satellite actually takes very little interference. In fact, just nudging one into a degrading orbit alone will eventually see the satellite break apart and burn up as its orbit degrades. A nuclear attack in orbit, however, would have much further reaching ramifications, and in fact could set off a cascading chain reaction that could wipe out the entire world's satellite infrastructure. When a satellite is destroyed, its debris continues to orbit the Earth, which can then impact other satellites, creating an even larger debris cloud. As the cloud continues to orbit, it would consume more and more satellites until eventually every satellite would be rendered inoperable. This frightening possibility is known as the Kessler syndrome, named after Donald J. Kessler, who proposed the scenario in 1978. Now, to be clear, a Kessler syndrome scenario could potentially be set off by the destruction of just a small number of satellites initially, but a nuclear weapon could allow Russia to ensure a global catastrophe with one fell swoop. Now, to get a sense of just how such a nuclear detonation might play out, we can look to the high-altitude nuclear testing of the early 1960s, in particular, an effort conducted by the American Atomic Energy Commission known as Operation Fishbowl. Now, Operation Fishbowl, which itself was a subset of the larger Operation Dominic, consisted of 5 high-altitude nuclear test detonations, but one test in particular, known as Starfish Prime, may be our best stand-in for the orbital weapon Russia is said to be developing. Starfish Prime consisted of a W-49 nuclear warhead carried aloft by a Thor rocket booster at an altitude of around 250 miles above the Earth, which is right about where the International Space Station orbits today. The weapon detonated with an estimated 1.4 megaton yield. Now, that's about 93 times the explosive power of the atomic bomb dropped on Hiroshima in 1945. The detonation flung a plume of high-energy electrons known as beta particles outward while also energizing a significant portion of the atmosphere below. The electromagnetic pulse created by this detonation immediately disabled 3 satellites elsewhere in low Earth orbit, with 6 more satellites failing over the months that followed due to the radiation belts left behind. One of the satellites taken out of commission, Ariel 1, was the UK's first ever put into orbit. The blast created a giant, though short-lived, cavity in Earth's ionosphere, and actually expelled the planet's entire magnetic field for almost 30 seconds. As one eyewitness put it, a bright white flash burned through the clouds, rapidly changing to an expanding green ball of irradiance extending into the clear sky above the overcast. Another witness, recorded at the time by the Hilo Tribune Herald, said, "It looked as though the heavens had belched forth a new sun that flared briefly, but long enough to set the sky on fire." 900 miles away in Hawaii, the detonation knocked out some 300 streetlights, set off burglar alarms, and interfered with phone calls. I'll quote NASA's David Sibick. "It came as a surprise how bad it was, and how long it lasted, and how damaging it was to satellites that flew through the area and died. The artificial radiation belt created by the detonation remained in Earth's orbit for over a decade. But it wasn't until 2006 that a lot of the data related to this experiment was finally declassified. Now, using that data, a team of computational physicists from the Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory finally presented the first computational model that could effectively simulate the EMP produced by Starfish Prime in October of 2022. Now, that same data and computational modeling could theoretically be used to assess the threat posed by Russia's planned orbital nuclear weapon that prompted Wednesday's announcement, once more information about the system's specifics are released anyway. But even without knowing the precise yield of such a weapon, it's not hard to assess the seriousness of this threat. Starfish Prime knocked out 9 of the world's 24 satellites at the time, but today there's an estimated 8,377 active satellites in orbit, and many more that are no longer active. The combination of the electromagnetic pulse and radiation belts, as well as the ensuing Kessler syndrome pandemonium, would all but assuredly leave the entire planet's satellite infrastructure in ruins. But importantly, that would have a serious impact on Russia as well. In fact, it would be devastating to the entire developed world, and that, oddly enough, should be cause for some degree of comfort. Because detonating such a weapon in orbit would have such serious and global implications, a weapon of this sort would be classified as a strategic deterrent, not unlike other nuclear weapons. The fact of the matter is, a nation doesn't derive value from the use of a strategic deterrent, like, say, a nuclear ICBM. It derives value from the threat of its use as diplomatic leverage. And again, this weapon, according to American officials, is not currently active or in orbit, seemingly pointing toward a developmental effort rather than an existing threat. That suggests this is certainly a serious development that warrants serious mitigation efforts within the Defense Department and among lawmakers. But Turner's decision to announce this threat via social media without any greater context is, to be plain, kinda weird. In fact, White House National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan said almost exactly that on Wednesday night. He said that he had already reached out to senior leaders within both parties and the intelligence community about this threat earlier in the week, and they already had a briefing scheduled to take place on Thursday. He went on to say that he was surprised by Turner's announcement and that it was highly unusual. Now, to be clear, this is certainly the sort of story that we will be keeping a close eye on, but in the meantime, it's not really the sort of story that warrants a great deal of concern among the general public if this isn't your bag. The truth is, Russia has possessed the means to wreak havoc on the world's satellite infrastructure for years now, using nothing more than anti-satellite missiles and the Kessler syndrome that could follow. This new weapon, while a significant point of concern for the Defense Department, could allow for a more rapid and certain destruction of the world's orbital assets, but this weapon does not represent a threat that didn't already exist in one form or another for years already. As for why exactly this development was announced in such a nebulous way via social media, well, it's not outside the realm of possibility that there was some sort of political motivation involved, but the melodrama of DC politics extends well outside my area of expertise, and I'll leave that one up to you guys in the comments. But in the meantime, while this development is certainly cause for some concern and is all but assuredly going to be the focus of multiple Space Force efforts in the not-too-distant future, this is not the sort of thing that you need to cancel your weekend plans over. Rumors of the apocalypse have been greatly exaggerated. And before we close, thanks for putting up with my raspy voice. I've got a serious head cold. It's what happens when you got a kid in kindergarten. And with that ends yet another edition of Air Power from Sandbox News. I'm Alex Hollings. Make sure to swing by sandboxnews.com today and every day for all the latest in news, entertainment, and motivation from all around the force. If you got anything out of today's video, make sure to click like and subscribe down below and leave me a comment so I know what I should cover next. And of course, don't forget to tap on that bell icon so you never miss a drop from Sandbox News.